not the thinking that saves you, but the knowing that emerges when the ego yields to the mystery. The modern mind, burdened by noise and tormented by thought, has become like a bird fluttering in a cage of its own making wings, bloodied not by an external hand, but by its own insistent flapping. And what is this cage, if not the compulsive need to resolve every ambiguity, to pierce the veil of every mystery with a blunt knife of reason? The overthinker is not merely a person who thinks too much. No, that is far too simplistic. The overthinker is often an individual who fears the abyss, the great open nothingness that yawns beneath every question that does not yield to immediate resolution. I have encountered this archetype in dreams in waking life, in the furrowed brows of patients who come to me, not to be cured, but to be unburdened of their own mind. They ask, why do I feel so heavy? And I say to them, because you are trying to carry the unknown with the muscles of logic. The anxious mind seeks control not because it is strong, but because it is afraid of chaos. The modern overthinker, driven by a subconscious compulsion, believes that safety lies in certainty, that if only they could think a little harder, plan a little more precisely, worry with just a bit more dedication, the future would yield itself to comfort. But the soul does not grow in certainty. The soul grows in surrender. It is in the unknown that the self expands and the psychic structure reaches towards its own wholeness. The true danger of overthinking lies not merely in exhaustion or paralysis. The danger is much deeper. It is the gradual silencing of the unconscious voice, the subtle murmurings of the archetypes, the dreams, the synchronicities that become drowned beneath the cacophony of anxious logic. You cannot hear the whisper of the soul when your mind is shouting questions it was never meant to answer. I recall a patient, a young woman, whose life was a symphony of fear, wrapped in the disguise of intelligence. She mapped every conversation before it began, replayed every glance for hidden meanings, and read into every silence a catastrophe yet to unfold. Her dreams were filled with mazes, endless corridors, doors that opened to mirrors, mirrors that reflected no one. She was brilliant, yes, but she was haunted by her refusal to allow mystery to simply be. Her thinking became a fortress, and yet she remained its only prisoner. No siege from the outside was required, for she had locked herself within. Overthinking is the mind's rebellion against its own powerlessness. But herein lies the paradox. The more the intellect seeks to dominate the unknown, the more it becomes consumed by it. The unconscious is not the enemy of the conscious mind, but it is its counterpart, its equal, and in some ways its master. When you allow yourself to descend into the intuitive depths, when you surrender the need to categorize and control, you do not become lost, you become initiated. The anxious soul fears what lies beneath because it senses that the structure of its identity is fragile, built on assumptions and ideas borrowed from the collective rather than unearthed from the self. Anxiety is the symptom of a split between the ego and the deeper reality of the psyche. It is the friction that arises when the persona, that mask we wear for the world, begins to crack under the pressure of the unconscious demanding to be seen, heard, integrated. What then is the warning? It is this: if you persist in believing that salvation lies in thinking your way out of fear, you may find that your very thoughts become the source of your suffering. The overthinker believes that their anxiety is caused by the unknown, when in fact it is caused by their refusal to let the unknown speak on its own terms. The archetypes, the dreams, the mythic truths that lie beneath our rational world, they are not problems to be solved, but realities to be related to. In the ancient mystery schools, initiation began with silence, not with answers, not with strategy, but with silence, darkness, and descent. The initiate was taken underground, not metaphorically, but literally, to lie in the tomb of unknowing in the belly of the earth. Only when the false light of intellect had been extinguished could the true light begin to emerge. And so it is with us. Overthinking is a defense against dissent, but dissent is the path to wholeness. You must learn to think in symbols. That is, you must begin to see your anxiety not as a malfunction, but as a messenger. What is the image of your anxiety? Is it a tightening serpent, a cracking mirror, a storm on the horizon? Let the image arise from your dream, your art, your intuition. Do not immediately analyze it. Hold it in your mind's eye. Let it breathe. Let it haunt you. For only when the image has saturated your being can its meaning emerge, not through deduction, but through participation. We must relearn the sacred art of dwelling with the unknown. The modern world has lost its capacity to wait, to sit in the holy discomfort of not knowing. But that is where the psyche begins to reorganize. That is where the anxious mind, if it can be gently turned inward, becomes not a prison but a portal. Anxiety is a threshold emotion. It tells you that you are approaching something important, something potentially transformative. But if you respond with more logic, more thinking, more frantic effort to restore the illusion of control, you will miss the invitation completely. The warning to overthinkers is not that they are doomed, but that they are seduced by the wrong God. The God of reason, of clarity, of immediate gratification, but the gods of the unconscious are older, darker, more patient. They speak in dreams, in synchronicities, in sudden inexplicable tears. If you wish to escape your anxiety, you must not run from the unknown, you must marry it. You must descend into it even when it makes no sense. Let me return to dreams. So often those who struggle with anxiety are visited by dreams of falling, of being chased, of standing on stage naked and unprepared. These are not meaningless. These are archetypal messages. The falling dream, for instance, represents the ego's terror at losing control. But it is also an invitation to let go, to surrender to gravity, the dream of being chased. It is the shadow, the part of you have refused to face, running to catch up with you. And the stage, that is the persona cracking under pressure. The true self does not fear exposure because it does not pretend it is. So what must be done? Not to think better thoughts, but to live differently, to enter into a sacred relationship with your own unconscious, to approach your mind not as a machine to be optimized, but as a temple to be honored. You must develop a ritual of inner listening. Carve out spaces in your life where nothing needs to be solved. Enter the stillness. Listen for the voice that does not speak in words. You see, my dear listener, it is not what you know that saves you. It is what you allow to be known through you. The anxious and overthinking individual is not cursed. They are gifted but misaligned. They have touched the veil but refuse to enter. They are aware of depths but unwilling to drown. But no transformation occurs without some form of death. The death of certainty, the death of performance, the death of the illusion that control equals safety. And yet what lies beyond that death is not destruction, it is a rebirth. And so I say to you again, not as a prophet, but as a guide through the interior terrain, that the mind that loops upon itself without end becomes like a snake that tries to swallow its own tail, the Ouroboros trapped in inertia rather than rebirth. Anxiety, when it is chronic and unexamined, becomes an inner jailer disguised as a sentinel. It tells you it is keeping you safe, alert, prepared, but in truth it binds you in a narrow cell of endless forecasting and defensive rituals that steal life from the present moment. In my work with patients, I often witnessed that the anxious individual was not weak. On the contrary, they were often deeply sensitive, profoundly attuned to subtle changes in the psychic weather of the room, and burdened with an acute consciousness that had not yet been tempered by symbolic wisdom. You see, when the ego is inflated with a responsibility to figure everything out, to prepare for every eventuality, it inevitably collapses under its own impossible task. That collapse often takes the form of panic paralysis, compulsive thought, or obsessive checking. These are not symptoms to be feared, but messages from the unconscious, screaming, Let go of control. Return to the sacred rhythm of psyche. The overthinker lives in the realm of logos, but is starved of eros. They rely so heavily on the rational faculties that they become divorced from the soulful, the felt, the mythic. They question everything, including their own instincts, and so the bridge to the self, the true center of being, begins to wither from disuse. What follows is a haunting disconnection from joy, from beauty, and from the symbolic meaning embedded in everyday life. To them, the world becomes a chessboard of potential mistakes rather than a living field of mystery. Let me offer you an image. Imagine a dreamer standing at the edge of a vast forest. The anxious thinker walks the perimeter of the woods over and over, calculating all the possible dangers that may lie within the wolves, the traps, the darkness. They create elaborate mental maps, forecasts, contingency plans, but they never enter the forest. And yet the transformation they seek lies within those very trees. Their salvation waits not in knowing everything, but in surrendering to the unknown. This is the paradox. The more you try to know in order to be safe, the further you drift from what will actually make you whole. The forest, of course, is a symbol of the unconscious, wild, ancient, unpredictable, but teeming with life and treasures buried beneath the moss. The overthinker must be taught not to extinguish their awareness, but to descend into it, not to suppress their thoughts, but to let them take symbolic form. The anxious mind is often haunted by archetypal images, persecutor, trickster, inner critic, but does not recognize them as such. Instead, it believes these voices to be objective truth. This is a tragedy, for what we take literally we become enslaved by. What we render symbolic we can work with and ultimately be transformed by. I once spoke to a patient who suffered from severe anxiety that expressed itself as perfectionism. Every morning she reviewed her to-do list with religious rigor, terrified that she might forget something vital. She checked her stove repeatedly, fearing it might cause a fire, though she lived alone and never cooked. She was brilliant, articulate, kind, but utterly exhausted. Her dreams were filled with images of burning houses, of clocks, melting, of a woman running but never arriving. These were not mere nightmares. They were the voice of the psyche crying out for release. I asked her, "What are you so afraid will burn down?" She paused and tears came. "Myself," she whispered. "If I stop being perfect, I will fall apart." And there it was, the archetype of the devouring mother within her, a voice installed in early life that said she must earn love through vigilance and flawlessness. We did not treat her anxiety as a disorder. We treated it as an initiation into her shadow. Her healing began not when she learned new coping strategies, but when she understood that the very part of her that feared collapse was the part that most needed to collapse, to fall, so it could rise anew. You must understand, anxiety is often a sacred signal that a false self is dying. The ego clings to control, to appearances, to certainty. But the self, the deeper organizing principle within the psyche, demands authenticity, wholeness, and the integration of opposites. And that means the anxious one must be willing to face the chaos they have avoided, not to conquer it, but to converse with it. Anxiety is not a defect. It is a mythological summons to transformation. I am not speaking to you from a place of dispassion. I, too, in my lifetime, encountered the ghosts of overanalysis. There were nights in Küsnacht when I would lie awake, not because I feared the world outside, but because I had opened a door too wide within. I had seen into the underworld of psyche, its serpents, its dead kings, its divine children, and I was undone. Yet from those moments of unraveling, I wove the threads of deeper knowing. So I say to you, who are burdened with a racing mind and an ever-anticipating soul, you are not mad, you are not broken, you are mythically alive in a world that has forgotten how to speak in myth. Your anxiety is a dragon at the gate. The question is not how to kill it, but how to meet it and what treasure it guards behind the fire. The first step is to reclaim reverence for the inner image. When the anxious mind begins to spiral, do not suppress it with shame or distract it with noise. Instead, invite it into the sanctum of your attention. Ask, what is this thought trying to protect? What part of me feels threatened? And then wait. Often the image will emerge, a child, a shattered figure, a crying mother, a great storm. These are your guides, not your enemies. Overthinking is a wound of the orphaned imagination. The anxious person thinks in order to survive, but they have forgotten how to dream in order to live. You must return to the imaginal, to the ritual, to the sacred practice of speaking with your own depths. The gods have not died. They have taken refuge in your complexes, your compulsions, your neuroses. They are waiting to be recognized not as tyrants, but as forgotten allies. In ancient myths, the anxious hero was not shamed for his fears. He was guided. Hermes might appear to lead him through the underworld. Hecate might stand at the crossroads. Today we medicate the hero instead of mentoring him. I do not say this to condemn all methods of treatment, many are necessary. But I urge you not to forget the symbolic layer beneath your suffering. Your anxiety is not just biology, it is biography, mythology, and alchemy, all woven together into a singular fire that demands to be tended, not extinguished. We must reimagine anxiety not as a malfunction, but as a threshold. It arises when the world we have constructed can no longer contain the fullness of who we are becoming. It is the sound of old armor, cracking as the soul expands. To overthink is to overarm oneself to prepare endlessly for battles that may never come, while neglecting the inner pilgrimage that awaits your courage and devotion. The anxious individual is in truth a mystic whose vision has not yet been trained. They feel everything but understand little, and so the burden becomes unbearable. But I tell you, if you dare to descend into the symbolic heart of your own panic, you will not find death, you will find rebirth. You will find that the thoughts that haunt you are not your enemies, but fragments of the self longing to return home. And so as we descend even deeper into the dim-lit corridors of the anxious psyche, we begin to sense not merely an overactive mind, but a spiritual disorientation. The overthinker is not simply a thinker, but a wanderer who has become estranged from his inner compass. It is not his thoughts that torment him. It is his severance from the inner voice, the silent whisper of the self that knows the way through the labyrinth. For anxiety in its purest form is not fear of the future nor memory of the past. It is a rupture in the relationship between ego and the unconscious. It is the soul crying out because the ego has grown too proud, too isolated, too enamored with its own cleverness. It sits atop its throne of logic, peering suspiciously at every impulse, dissecting every feeling like a surgeon dissecting a heart, yet forgetting that a heart cannot be understood through analysis alone, only through reverence. To the anxious individual, life becomes a terrain of perpetual contingency. Every action must be anticipated, every word rehearsed. But the more we attempt to anticipate life, the more lifeless it becomes. You see, overthinking is the soul's rebellion against spontaneity, the fearful protest of a mind that has lost trust in life and so builds mental walls to protect against the unknown. But these walls also shield us from grace. Many of my patients, and perhaps many of you listening now, are not suffering from madness or even depression. You are suffering from an overload of unintegrated content. You have opened the gateway to the unconscious through dreams, through intuition, through trauma, and instead of receiving this influx with symbolic humility, you attempt to rationalize it, organize it, file it into neat categories. But the unconscious does not respond to domination. It is not a servant of logic. It is a dragon, a god, a mother, a trickster. It demands dialogue, not control. Consider this. When the gods are ignored, they return as neuroses. Yes, when you overthink, you do not merely think too much. You displace your soul's yearning for meaning into the sterile halls of cognition. The anxious person is not flawed in their ability to think, but rather in their refusal to feel deeply, to feel irrationally, to feel vulnerably. What you call anxiety is often the inflamed edge of your unlived life. That which you suppress, that which you fear, to desire that which you have banished to the shadow, returns as the tremble in your hands, the tightening in your chest, the dizziness of being a self who no longer knows where the center lies. This is why I must say to you, your anxious thoughts are not your enemy. They are, in fact, the loyal hounds barking at the gate of your neglected temple. They demand not medication alone, but meaning. And here is where the intuitive among you, the dreamers, the sensitive ones, are most at risk. For you are already attuned to the winds of the inner world, but without grounding, this sensitivity becomes a curse. The world becomes too loud, the body too porous, the soul too open. You begin to sense the moods of others, absorb their despair, and confuse it with your own. And in trying to interpret this flood of sensation, you retreat further into your head, where thoughts spiral like whirlpools and drag you down into exhaustion. Let me tell you a dream, not from a patient, but one that visited me during my own dark night of the soul. In the dream, I stood on the shore of a vast black sea. The sky was full of crows circling silently, and the waves whispered secrets in forgotten tongues. Behind me stood a tower, crumbling and overgrown with ivy, the Tower of Reason. I knew that I had lived there safely for many years, but in the dream a voice rose from the sea and said, "You cannot live in the tower forever. Come down, enter the water, let it baptize your mind." I woke in terror, and yet that dream became my guide. For the anxious mind clings to its tower, believing it can outthink the storm. But healing comes only when one descends not into madness, but into the depths of feeling, intuition, and symbol. That descent, that letting go, is not weakness, it is initiation. And here we find the paradox. The more you resist the irrational, the more it possesses you. But when you face it willingly through art, through active imagination, through honest confrontation with your own darkness, it transforms. The dragon guarding the treasure becomes the ally that reveals it. The overthinking mind becomes the attentive mind. The anxious heart becomes the listening heart. You are not meant to be a machine. Your soul is not optimized for certainty. It is shaped by mystery, tension, paradox, and yes, suffering. But there is beauty in this. For only that which can break can also become whole. When you finally understand that anxiety is not a malfunction, but a messenger, you begin to ask different questions. No longer do you ask, how do I stop feeling this? But rather, what in me is trying to be known through this feeling? This is the beginning of individuation, the long and holy road toward becoming the whole of who you are. And it cannot be done without passing through the valley of tension, through the fire of contradiction, through the very chaos your thoughts are trying to avoid. Let me be clear, thinking in itself is not your enemy. Thinking is sacred when it is rooted in the heart, when it is married to the soul. But when thinking becomes divorced from feeling, when it floats above life like a drone scanning for danger, then it turns into pathology. The mind becomes a predator feeding on its own tail, generating thought after thought without meaning. This is not intelligence. This is fear masquerading as control. And what does the anxious thinker most crave? Control, certainty, the illusion of predictability. But the psyche does not thrive in certainty. It wilts. The soul speaks in dreams, in symbols, in metaphors. It requires us to tolerate ambiguity, to hold opposing truths at once, not because it is vague, but because it is vast. You see, we have confused knowledge with wisdom. Knowledge can be accumulated. It can be measured, tested, reproduced. But wisdom emerges from the marriage of suffering and reflection. The anxious person often has too much knowledge and not enough intimacy with their own wounds. They analyze the fire instead of stepping into it. And yet you must burn, not in the flames of destruction, but in the sacred fire of transmutation. The old self, The one who clung to control, who feared the unknown, who silenced the inner voice for the approval of the outer world, that self must perish. In its ashes, a new form arises. Not a perfect one, but a true one. An individual no longer obsessed with escaping discomfort, but rather dedicated to understanding what that discomfort reveals about the mystery of the soul. Let us not forget that even the gods required sacrifice. And what must the overthinker sacrifice? The illusion of safety, the fantasy of control, the comfort of disconnection. For these are the offerings that open the gate to the deeper self. There is a silence underneath the noise of thought, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of the numinous. You have felt it, perhaps in a dream, perhaps in the gaze of a stranger, perhaps in the woods when no one else was watching. It is the hush of the eternal reminding you that you are not merely a brain on a stick. You are a vessel of archetypes, of mysteries older than language. And here lies the true danger of overthinking, not that it makes you anxious, but that it prevents you from descending into this mystery. It traps you in the upper chambers of your psyche, like a bird endlessly circling a dome, unaware that the door has always been opened downward. Those who feel too much, who sense too deeply, are not cursed. They are being called. But the call will torment them until they answer, not with cleverness, not with over-preparation, but with courage. Courage to listen, courage to feel, courage to break. You must come to see your anxiety not as an intruder, but as a part of your psychic ecology, a weather pattern of the soul. It has something to say. And though it may use the language of fear, its message is often holy. You have strayed from yourself. Come home. In this home, you will not be asked to explain yourself endlessly. You will not be required to make sense of every sensation. You will be asked only to be present, to surrender the compulsive need for answers, and to trust that the self is guiding you not away from life, but deeper into it. The overthinker must become a symbol reader. The anxious one must become a soul listener. You are being asked to shift from horizontal awareness, the timeline of cause and effect, to vertical awareness, the eternal now, where your wounds and your wisdom are one. Let this be your turning, not an escape from thought, but a descent into soul. For only there will you find the stillness that the mind in all its frenzy has been secretly longing for.